Today, we're exploring a topic that might hit closer to home than you expect, especially if you've ever looked at your own experiences, maybe from childhood, and felt, I don't know, like something was missing. That feeling of being maybe too much sometimes, or other times just not enough without really knowing why. Well, today we're zeroing in on something called emotional neglect. The material we're looking at calls it the silent damage that shapes millions without a sound.
Yeah, and I think it's really crucial right off the bat to be clear about what emotional neglect isn't. It's generally not about physical abuse. It's not overt violence. Often it's not even intentional harm. It's more about an absence. The definition we're working with is the absence of emotional presence. So this happens when your feelings, your needs, maybe your experiences, they were just consistently ignored or minimized, dismissed, especially when you were young. Think about being a kid and hearing, "Stop crying, you're fine," when you're clearly not fine. Or maybe, "Don't be so dramatic," when you're just trying to express something big you're feeling. Or even being praised, but specifically for being quiet, for being obedient, not for, actually showing how you feel. It's that lack of someone really tuning in emotionally. That's what leaves the mark.
That's such a key distinction, that idea of absence. It really highlights something we found in the sources. You didn't have to be hit to be hurt. Sometimes silence scars deeper. So our goal here in this deep dive is to bring this often invisible experience out into the light. We want to understand its impact, how it shows up for us as adults, and importantly, talk about ways to heal. So as we go through this, maybe just hold that question. How might these patterns, these silences, have shown up in your life? Perhaps in ways you haven't quite connected before. Okay, so if that idea of neglect as an absence resonates, maybe you're thinking, but how? How does something so quiet leave such a big mark? Especially if, looking back, your childhood seemed, pretty normal from the outside. Let's get into that. How does this silent damage actually show up in your day-to-day life now?
Right. And it's often really subtle, the way it manifests. One of the biggest signs, actually, is just struggling to identify your own feelings. Like you might feel something, a knot in your stomach maybe, or just this vague sense of unease, but putting a name on it. Is it sadness, anger, frustration, even something positive like joy? It's like there's a fog there. And that often connects to this deeper feeling of, well, unworthiness. Like your needs just aren't valid, not important enough to even voice, which then naturally leads to avoiding vulnerability. You might see being vulnerable as a huge weakness, instead of what it actually is, a way to connect. We also see people tend to over-explain themselves a lot in conversations, almost like you constantly have to justify why you think something or even why you're there. Like you're afraid you won't be understood or accepted otherwise. And then there's this real paradox, isn't there? You might deeply crave connection, real closeness, but at the same time, you're terrified of it. So you push people away, maybe by people pleasing so much they can't get truly close, or just by creating distance really quickly. The source material summed it up so well. Emotional neglect makes you an expert in suppressing needs and a stranger to receiving love.
Wow. A stranger to receiving love. That really lands. So, okay, what does that actually look like in relationships? When you're trying to connect with someone, imagine that scenario, right? Your partner asks you a simple question, what's wrong? And your genuine answer is, I don't know. And the sources we looked at were really clear about this. They say, that's not avoidance, it's wiring. It's not like you're choosing to be difficult or shut down. It's literally how your system learned to cope when emotions weren't really seen or validated.
Exactly. And if you zoom out a bit, what the research shows is that this kind of neglect, it fundamentally teaches you not to trust your own emotions. They don't feel like reliable guides. So this can play out in a couple of main ways in relationships. On one hand, you might just shut down, go numb when things get emotional or difficult, become distant. Or the flip side, you might hold everything in until you just kind of explode when it's too much, because you haven't really learned those healthier, more nuanced ways to process and express feelings as they come up. For people with this background, intimacy itself can feel really intense, overwhelming, even suffocating sometimes. Just getting attention, even positive attention, can feel unsafe. Like maybe it comes with judgment or pressure. And love can feel really temporary, like it could just disappear at any moment. So you're always sort of watching, waiting, anxious. And this is so important, despite how deep these patterns run, there's absolutely hope. Healing is possible. And it often starts, as the material suggests, with naming what happened, even if no one else will. Just acknowledging it for yourself.
Okay, so given how deep this wiring goes and how, well, invisible the damage often feels because it was about what wasn't there, the whole idea of healing can seem pretty overwhelming, can it? So how do you start to heal something that wasn't like a specific event, but this ongoing lack? Our sources talk about this not as blaming anyone, but more like Breaking generational silence, what does that look like in practice?
It's definitely a journey, and it's personal, but there's some pretty clear steps that the sources outline. First, and maybe the hardest step for some, is to name the neglect. This means really acknowledging, just for yourself first, that yes, this happened to me. Validating your own experience, even if there's no proof, even if no one else saw it or would agree, it's about owning your reality. Second step, feel without judgment. This is about starting to understand that emotions are just, well, messengers. They're signals. They aren't good or bad, right or wrong. They're just information about what's going on inside you. So allowing yourself to actually feel them without that layer of self-criticism, that's huge. It's a form of self-acceptance. Then third, reparent yourself. This sounds a bit abstract maybe, but it's actually very practical. It means consciously being the compassionate, understanding parent to yourself that you needed back then. Talking to yourself internally with validation, comfort, gentle guidance, applying that voice to how you feel now. Fourth is set boundaries. This is crucial. It's about learning to establish limits in your relationships.
Realizing you don't owe everyone unlimited access to you, your time, your energy, your emotions, even with family. If interacting with someone compromises your well-being, it's okay to set a boundary. It's about protecting your emotional safety as you heal. And finally, number 5, seek safe support. This means intentionally finding people you trust who can offer a secure, non-judgmental space. That could be a therapist, definitely, or a coach, or even just a really emotionally mature, empathetic friend, someone safe to process with.
That's a really hopeful framework. It sounds like it fundamentally shifts how you see yourself, doesn't it? Moving away from that self-blame, that feeling of, I'm just too sensitive, or what's wrong with me? And moving towards something like, wait, my emotions are valid, they're important. The sources said it beautifully. It means going from I'm too sensitive to my emotions are sacred. That must feel incredibly freeing. So thinking about all this is, if emotional neglect often works like this invisible damage, this silent wound, what might happen if you start to consciously acknowledge and maybe even value those parts of your inner world that were previously ignored or unspoken? What new sense of self, what different kind of understanding could you begin to cultivate just by starting there, by listening to what was silent within you? Maybe consider how that simple act of acknowledgement could invite a different kind of presence into your own life starting today.